Ceann Comhairle, I have to say this is an extraordinary bill. Now, I understand today that a lot of people have gone home because of Storm Lorenzo. But last night, after the Minister, there was no government speaker. And I think that either shows a lack of interest on behalf of the Fine Gael Party, or that there's nothing really of significance in this bill, because there was a time, if there was a broadcasting bill in the House, there would have been an absolute queue of speakers. So a lot of the bill here is quite technical, and it does correct some small technical issues in relation to the funding of BAI and so on. But I'm not sure that it actually addresses the great changes that have happened in broadcasting in recent years and in the whole nature of new technology, where we can all receive and get stuff on a handheld device called a telephone. And furthermore, there is widespread dissemination of knowledge outside of the formal media. But I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed that this bill hasn't looked at some of the fundamental issues of broadcasting, because the present government is there for 7 years and they've had a lot of time to think about broadcasting. Now, there are Dáil Éireann bille, chóir mé bille, le an foca gailge. Agus seachas tagart go tídí cethir ní léon tagartí go gailge, go ní léon bhíornaí an faoin gailge. Agus chuir sé sin iontas orm. Mar a mí bealtaí na sicáite fáiltíomh túrascail ag coiste. Coiste go dtí an héine rá an tá córa anchuideocht lena bhunú, sé sin an cóchaiste gailge gaeltachta go Uile. Agus dailtí siad. Multi-áirid mar le creolachan trú gailge, agus is just a multi-bhí ráhwala a bhain go sonrach le reachtaíocht. I bhfuair a héin go dreisiófaí le práinn na míorna faoin gailge san nach creolachan 2009, chun cuireadh chumas údarás creolachan na hÉireann, Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, Polasa gailge gníomhacha a orbert I bord le creoltóirí an Stáit. As a daramóla bhí an ná go nanófaí creoltóireacht na gailge mar phríomh chúlgas in éon san bhíú nua go creoltóireacht headmhísí poiblí in éon reachtaíocht chumarsáide leasathe nó nua gréachtathe. Now, I was looking up the Constitution. And the Constitution is very interesting in relation to the status of Irish language, and it's a constitutional status, and no matter what people might think personally, the legislature and the government have to respect the Constitution. And there's a lot of talk about people not respecting the law across the country, across the water. But it's very important in this country that we don't start saying, well, that part of the Constitution doesn't matter and this part does. What the Constitution says in relation to the Irish language, now go bí an teanga náisiúntaí, agus á bhfear sin go bí an príomhthanga náisiúntaí. In other words, that the Irish language is the first, well, it doesn't say the word, it doesn't actually, it says the official language, and then it says it's féidir an sacbhéarla of Seshamar. So, and it says because it is príomhthanga, which means the primary language, the primary national language. Now, sorry, my apologies. Now, it seems to me at times that people kind of want to just ignore that, as if it wasn't a constitutional imperative. And I remember certainly AG when we were in government, who, even though he didn't have Irish himself, was very, very strong in this point, that there's just no getting away from it. And if you're unhappy with that, bring a constitutional amendment before the people. I don't think, funny enough, that they would accept a change in it. But if they don't, therefore, it is the will of the people. Now, the reality is, of course, when you look at broadcasting and broadcasting finances, you'd think that the Irish language was a minority language and not a national language. And again, I'm absolutely stunned that there's no mention in relation to broadcasting through the Irish language in this bill. We all know that there are huge deficiencies. There's a very bad architecture of how it's all funded. And this matter should be addressed by government. Now, of course, one of the great deficiencies, particularly with the development of new media, with more private media, is that we keep avoiding the question as to why we're subsidising RTE to the level we are, and what is our definition of public service broadcasting. Do we really need to subsidise RTE to do things that other English language broadcasters in this country, for example Virgin or the commercial radio stations like Newstalk and so on, are doing without subsidy? Do we really need to subsidise them for that, for life, like comedy shows and so on? So I think it's time we decided what is public service broadcasting, and therefore decided that the cadúnas or the licence and the direct state subsidy should go for the purposes of public service broadcasting. Now, the second thing is, since the inception of local radio, and since the decision was taken, for better or for worse, that local radio would be controlled by private interests, not by either local authorities or the state, a lot of public service broadcasting per force has to be done by the private sector, because there is no public sector in these sectors. So, Minister, the bill is a cop-out because it dodges the big issues. And it is my view that we need very, very urgently now to decide, number one, what is public service broadcasting? Why does the Exchequer fund public service broadcasting? Is it for things like documentaries? Is it for things to produce good native drama? Is it to ensure that, for example, there's good coverage of our indigenous sports and also those sports played by Irish people, whether they're playing at home or abroad, nationally or internationally? Is it for all those obvious issues of national interest? And the second question then is, when we're funding them, do we differentiate between the state funders, the state-owned broadcasting entities and the privately owned ones? And if we say it's only the state-owned ones, does that mean that we're precluding from public service broadcasting all of the local service stations, particularly the radio stations, that provide such basic public service broadcasting in their local areas? Now, where I live, of course, on a local level, it's an interesting situation, because Radio na Gaeltachta, as a national station, also obviously focuses quite a bit on the Gaeltacht. It is Radio na Gaeltachta, and the biggest Gaeltacht in the country. In fact, half of the native speakers of Irish live in my constituency. So, in practical terms, when it comes to local news, you have two main suppliers. You've Galway Bay FM and you've got Radio na Gaeltachta, and they perform overlapping functions. And the question I have is, if local news and sport and whatever are being broadcast by Radio na Gaeltachta, and they should be supported, and they're broadcasting minority language, should not those types of public service remit of these companies in the private sector, because there is no state alternative, not also be supported? And therefore, when are we going to have the debate and make a decision, and a rational debate that doesn't dodge the issues? Now, I know there are big vested interests, and a big vested interest down the road from where I grew up, in a place called Montrose in Donnybrook, that think the licence is theirs. But vested interests have to be taken on if there are other people who've got an equally legitimate claim to funding on the basis of the work they're doing. Now, the next thing I'd like to address myself to is the fact that you've once again dodged the money issue. And you gave reasons that the LPT was one thing and the licence was another. Let's put the LPT aside. It would be handy maybe to collect it through the LPT. I hear your argument. There's also the fact that the licence is collected from commercial entities. LPT isn't. It's rates that you collect. I accept all of that. What I do know is that the licence as we know it now is a terribly bad way of collecting money for a number of reasons. The first thing is this: like in the 60s, the definition of a radio, once the transistor came in that you could bring round with you, the old radio licence had to be abolished. There was a radio licence initially, long before television licence, and quite sensibly in the early 60s. Once the transistors came in, they got rid of it and said this is non-operable anymore because you could have a radio in your pocket. And the reality is, a television as we knew it, the big box in the corner that was quite visible, has disappeared. And the whole way of receiving it, you could watch a match on a tablet, laptop, you can watch it on your phone. So the receiving machinery or gadget, in my view, is an old-fashioned way of deciding who has to and who doesn't have to have a licence. Now, the next problem with the licence is it's totally inefficient because you're not managing, and according to figures you have, the number of people who don't pay the licence, who you feel are obligated to pay the licence, is very, very high. And there's a huge amount of money putting ads and everything out there telling people you have to have your licence. But we know default is high. So any system that has a high default rate is a flawed system. And the third thing is it's incredibly expensive to collect. It's an inefficient system. Because any system that you physically have to send people around to the houses to check that they actually do have this device, and then it's very hard to define the device, is a stupid system. So I think we have to admit that the sell-by date of this licence is probably gone, and there are many other ways the state can collect money, but that the idea of attaching it to a device is gone. The second myth that persists is that the licence is somehow the property of RTE. The licence actually is paid into the Department of Communications, it goes into the central fund, and then it's dispersed. So it's only another taxation into the fund. And funny enough, when you go to disperse the money, you actually have, because that's how TG Ceathair is mainly funded, you actually have a slice of exchequer funding. Now, my view is there's two issues to be decided. One, how much should the state give to broadcasting? And that should be one wad of money. And the second one is, what is going to be the source of that? Is it going to be just general central exchequer funding, or are you going to have some dedicated funding channel? But I think the mix that was created when TG Ceathair was created is quite anomalous and bizarre. And then, of course, the final decision you have to make is, having got the fund and the pot put together, how are you going to distribute it? And we have to get away from what I call the historic model, that certain players got the lion's share of the money without a huge amount of scrutiny, just because they always got it in the past. That goes back to the days that there was just a state broadcaster. Now, I have to also say that the funding of TG Ceathair is a disgrace. TG Ceathair is incredibly important for all of those people in this state, whether they have fluent Irish or not, who believe that the promotion of the Irish language is important, and that it's important that Irish speakers or those who want to watch Irish programmes have access to good programming. We know with the very, very meagre resources they have that they're lean, mean and efficient. We know that they produce excellent programmes. We know that many people who are not fluent in Irish because of the subtitles particularly watch their sports and particularly watch their documentaries, and that in fact TG Ceathair produced some of the best documentaries in recent times. But the real sad part is that most of TG Ceathair's broadcasting actually is in the English language because they cannot afford to make enough programmes. They are truly a public service broadcaster when they are broadcasting in Irish, but they're not truly a public service broadcaster when they're playing and broadcasting other material that's not relating to their main function, which is TG Cahis. Television Gaeilge na Gaeltachta, a Cahis. And this issue has to be tackled. Now, the other question to public service broadcasting that never ceases to fascinate me is why, if RTE do a current affairs programme, is that considered public service broadcasting, but if Virgin Television, which was TV3, do a public service broadcasting, a political debate programme, and they do some very good political debate programmes, it's not considered public service broadcasting for the purpose of subsidy. Why does one get a lot of money for doing these things and the other one be expected to do them for free? It's an irrational situation, and we haven't had the debate. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I'm saying that certainly this bill doesn't tackle any of it. And there hasn't been a debate, and the Minister should start a debate, put a finite date for finishing debate, and come back with proposals. I believe the local radio, there's little messing at the edges for local radio about helping journalists, but the core of local radio's remit, the great things that they really do well, will be current affairs and local news. And they're fair in a way that I'm not sure all the time, and they're very transparent how they do it, and they're much more accessible. If somebody wants to get on RTE, even a public representative, it seems to me that's very hard if you're not in the selected few. But with your local radio station, if you have something sensible to say, as long as you would stay within the law and you're a public representative or any other person that has something of substance to say, access isn't a problem. So I always call local radio access radio for the ordinary people. The other thing they do tremendously well are sports, local sport. And fair play, TG Cahir followed into that with the club matches, and now I notice that the big boys have suddenly realised, RTE, that actually there's huge interest in these things, and they're jumping on the bandwagon after 15 years. And can I, by the way, and as a side, say, fair play to TG Cahir. There was 56,000, I think, watching the ladies' football final. It was TG Cahir alone that promoted women's Gaelic football in this country, when it was neither profitable or popular. And they made it. I'm not saying the organisation and the players and whatever, but they gave them the shop window. Look at the results. And therefore, my view is we'll have to grasp the nettle. We don't have a state-local broadcasting service. They are public service in the truest sense, and we have to help them. And again today, I have no doubt that if you turn on your local radio stations along the West Coast, there will be continuous updates on a local level in relation to roads closed, trees fallen, and all the other things that a national broadcaster can't do. Finally, and I have to say that for 20 years now, in the year 2000, the young people of the Gaeltacht asked for a radio station for young people through the Irish language. With modern technology, the broadband is the tunta, the band is there to provide it. The frequencies are there. Minister, it is time the young people of Ireland, not only the Gaeltacht, but anybody with an interest in the Irish language, and remember that includes everybody going to Gaelscoileanna and a lot of other people who have fluent Irish, have gone to the Gaeltacht and have fluent Irish, who go to schools that teach through English. We need a radio station, a la 2FM, that will broadcast through the medium of the Irish language. We have asked as a community for that again and again and again. Some of the technical difficulties that were there in terms of frequencies being available no longer exist. That one could be delivered, but it will only be delivered properly on a national basis on FM. There is an internet station, but it's not the same thing. It'll only be delivered when the state decides that, as I said, the first official language and the national language, which is the same language, gets due recognition. Gurmagat.